glass of water. My Lotus days go back to the beginning of 1971. I'd had 10 years at Jaguar, and I joined Lotus to help develop the upmarket cars that started with the Elite and the Eclat. But the Elite was actually started on the 14th of November 1967, when the directors of Lotus issued a specification for a four-seater Lotus. That project started enthusiastically, and then it lost enthusiasm of the directors and the staff. And by the time I got there, everybody was pretty sad. They were probably a damn sight sadder when I got there, but they were miserable before I got there. This was the car that was scrapped when I arrived. It was designed by John Frayling. It was quite pretty, but it was aerodynamically disastrous. Well, that was the excuse given. So, a quick baptism at Lotus was cut the fins off the Europa, do some new paint colours and things like that, and by the way, we need a new four-seater car. So, forgive me for this. The first Saturday morning, you can look this up, the first Saturday morning in March 1971, I worked at my drawing board with Chapman, Kimberley and Rudd, and in the course of that morning we basically came up with the Elite as we see out there. Very little different. And first thing on Monday I had to start drawing it as a proper engineering package. So that 2 weeks later a 1/4 scale model was produced. So then I say, check the picture up. This was the quarter scale model, and you'll see it looks pretty much the same as the cars outside. The bumpers and front end were totally different. This was before American bumpers were thought of, and there was less bright metal around the windows and things. But unfortunately, in the course of the development of the car, Mr. Chapman wanted his nice glittery bright parts. So a lot of the black bits went silver. He then approved that if it was good aerodynamics. So, next picture please. We spent a lot of time in the wind tunnel for models at Specialised Mouldings in Huntingdon. They were the people that did the Lola T70, and at MIRA, the Motor Industry Research Association in the Midlands in England. We were going to the wind tunnel 6-7 times, little modifications to develop what eventually became a landmark low drag, low lift car. Meanwhile, Colin Chapman actually designed the backbone and basic suspension of the car over a weekend at his home. It was a scheme, it wasn't detailed obviously, but he is the man responsible for the basic thinking in the chassis of these cars. Despite some of the arguments that Mr. Kimberley and Mr. Rudd pointing out that the rear suspension theoretically doesn't work, and Chapman said, yes it does, and well it does, doesn't it? We then moved to the full-size model. For the glass fibre we need a full-size model. And so through May, June we built the full-size model at Lotus, not in clay, but in body filler, about that thick, on top of foam plastic. So, that is the full-size model. I've always prided myself on trying to make a full-size model as real as possible, because this is where the directors of the company commit enormous sums of money. If you try and fool them by making the wheels stick out a little bit too much, making the windshield a bit too raked, you're only going to screw the company 18 months, 2 years later. So hopefully that was pretty realistic. The wheels, incidentally, are glass fibre, sprayed with aluminium and then polished. And the tyres actually had the bottom cut off because there's no air in them, so they sit properly on the road. And the licence plate is off my car, which meant I drove home without any. Next, please. Although this is a rather ancient photograph, it's one that is close to my heart, because originally the tailgate had hinges inside and had a black metal edge,
Like the Sunbeam,
not a big silver one.
like the Sunbeam Lotus. Yeah.
I thought that looked nicer. But anyway, this is how you survive, is by saying yes to the boss when things are looking a bit... We then moved on to the interior, but we had a major problem. We'd run out of staff. The engineering staff working on this car, what were there? 2 on the body, 3 on the engine, and 2 on the chassis. And in the workshops, 3 to make the body models, and that's all the inside stuff as well, the inside of the doors and so on. 3 metal fabricators to make the chassis, suspension parts, etc. So when I had to make a model of the inside, there wasn't anybody to do it. So I borrowed a few people and we made a pretty good mess of it. The interior I would have done would have been a little bit like the Rover 3000, a box of instruments and a big open shelf, so that you've got all the light come in and lots of feeling of space. Well, Chapman realised that I wasn't getting anywhere when we both went to the Geneva Motor Show, and like an idiot I introduced Chapman to Giugiaro. And if you've ever seen people fall in love instantly, that was it. I'm surprised they both weren't thrown out, you know. So 2 weeks later, I'm in a truck driving a prototype handmade body to Turin for Giugiaro to do the interior, which he did. The problem was that he had no restriction on what he did, and when it came back to England, Chapman said, "You must copy that exactly." Now, luckily, it wasn't me that had to do it. It was Colin Spooner and 2 other engineers. But it took them nearly a year, because basically it wouldn't fit together, it wouldn't engineer. Because Giugiaro was used to doing interiors for Fiat, Alfa Romeo, or in big plastic mouldings, injection mouldings. We couldn't afford that. And that was a huge delay in the car. But the other thing that was a problem was how we made the body, this injection moulding, which up until then all glass fibre cars were made by hand. And this was made like a plastic toothbrush. No comments on whether it looks like. And to get that process to work proved to be extremely difficult. And I could be here for a week telling you what went wrong. Anyway, it's none of your business. So, development time was being lost while struggling with the body, struggling with the interior. But in the end, right, that's going through the aerodynamics, which actually, I'm shortening this a little bit because I can see you falling asleep. I was kind of proud of that. That's the horsepower needed to push it along at 100 miles an hour. Before you ask, that's because the mathematical formula is easiest at that speed. I don't even have to get the decimal point right. I think it's quite interesting, the Citroën DS, because that was always held up as the perfect aerodynamics. Not even as good as a Ford Capri, and that wasn't terribly good anyway. But when you think that the M50, which is the car we're talking about, was 2/3, 60–70% bigger frontal area than the Europa, I think we were doing pretty well. Okay. Well, you can try and guess which is which. I'm the elegant one who hasn't been to the hairdresser for about 3 years. Chapman said in the end, right, you've got to build one car perfect as for a customer in engineering, and that was it. That probably had as much put on it at night as it did during the day. But finally, we got, okay, go into production. You know, you can do it. And then it was, okay, Ollie, don't forget, we got the coupe. The Elite is a sedan, the saloon. We need the coupe. And this was one of my drawings, because I had to keep nearly all the existing car. It's only this back piece that changed. And some of you may have heard the story about the gas mask. Anybody heard the story about the gas mask? Oh, what a pity.
From
The length of the back window went up and down and up and down so many times I didn't know what to do. And it was just becoming the summer holiday for the company. So at lunchtime we went to the bar. And I had to present my model, the Chapman and the directors, immediately after lunch. Now, Mr. Chapman didn't like people going for a beer during the working day. And in the pub, in the bar, there was a Second World War gas mask. So for reasons I don't know, I borrowed it. So I'm standing in the boardroom, model on the table, my suit on, my tie, and my gas mask. Well, it did the trick. The other directors hid under the table, in the next room, etc. Chapman stood there and calmly said, "Ollie, why are you wearing a gas mask?" So I pulled the rubber and said, "Because I've had a beer," and let go. That was a big mistake. It's on rubber, remember. I had a lot of tears in my eyes when he said, "Right, go ahead. When can I drive the prototype home?" And I said, 5th of November. This was end of July, beginning of August. And he did. But remember, the Elite was not in production. I couldn't just go and get the Elite and saw it up. But we did it. And home the car went. Now, the observant members of the audience that are still awake will notice that the rear end is actually different. That panel was inset. I had nothing to do with the removal of that from the design. That happened later. Personally, I preferred mine, but then I suppose that's pretty natural, really. And the next one is the next project. When you're designing stuff, you're quite quickly signing it off, waving it goodbye, asking what's the next one. The next one was the realisation that the two-seater Eclat was going out of production. It had made the company a lot of money, a lot of fame, and suddenly everything at Lotus was relying on the new big four-seater and its coupe. And some distance away was the Esprit, which was nowhere near ready. And so, unofficially, we were never allowed to work on this in the working day. We designed a short wheelbase Elite, 7 inches shorter. And that was one of the drawings he didn't like. But when we got to this one, he really liked that. And it was going to use a simplified engine specification, a basic interior, no air conditioning, things like that. And it was a strict two-seater. And that's when the financial director, Fred Bushell, explained that we had absolutely no money. So I took the drawing home and the rest went in the dustbin. And that essentially was that for the time being. I went off to do other things. Boats for Mr. Chapman, car for TVR, and then Mr. Chapman and myself came together again. That, in fact, was basically this idea up to 1980. So we jumped quite a long way. And this was what became the front-wheel drive Elan, nearly 10 years later. The famous M90, X100, M100 are the code names. They're really all the same car, but if you change the code name, everybody thinks it's new, you know. So the interesting thing is that it was a bit like people separating and coming back together. That's my first model of the M90 with a 2-litre Toyota engine, the same gearbox as the XL, same rear suspension, in fact the same frame as an XL. Except it was for this first, and then the XL got it, and this stumbled, lack of money, and went through a tough time. For those that don't know, Colin Spooner, Roger Putnam, Mike Kimberley, Colin Chapman and myself are the individuals. All very key to a lot of things for a long time. The model is made of wood, highly finished. Finishing takes as long as the model. But that was within 0.5 millimetre to dimension all over, but it was made by hand. The skill of the pattern makers at Lotus at that time was absolutely top notch. It was better than half the Formula 1 teams had had. Well, that car was really too big. It was nice, but it was too big. So over the next few months, as we got Toyota's final signatures that they would be partners in this, effectively a joint venture project, we carried on developing. And we had the very good fortune that Toyota produced their little 1.6 litre aluminium twin cam engine. And a little sweetie of a thing, you could pick it up and put it in your pocket, with about 125 brake horsepower, legendary reliability, and we didn't use the XL gearbox, we had a smaller one, Japan only, a smaller final drive. That car is shorter than a Triumph TR7, but it's a 2+2, which, when you think about it, ain't bad going, as I say it myself. And it had a sister, if you, and that's his sister, the one we forgot to put the roof on. And as we got those models finished and presented them to Colin Chapman, he finally felt that this project was going the right way. And it's incredibly sad that he died 2 weeks later. I'm happy that he was sort of happy with this. I'm sure you all know he was having a few difficulties answering certain questions, and we were having incredible difficulty getting any money. We needed about £7 million sterling to do this properly, really properly, right through to launch. We'd actually got about -2 million. And I worked on by myself. I had nobody with me, just locked in a room. You see, people at Lotus dislike me as much as you do. Locked in a room by myself, and we decided the best way to attract the money was to actually build one. So I'm sorry about the quality of the photograph. That is the only one of the X100 because the bumper's different, but the rest's the same. I did about 3,000 miles in it. 3 of them on the public road, because the license plate wasn't quite real. The rest on test track, including it went to Japan, and I went with it. And we spent a month at Toyota being assessed. It was pretty nearly 100% reliable. It never leaked a drop of water. It would take 4 full-size adults. The back ones weren't too comfortable, but they were in there. That car was then superseded by the first front-wheel drive design, and therefore marks the end of the lineage of the backbone chassis that started with the Elite and came through to this. However, this was put in a corner with a dust sheet and remained in the company until 1997-8, when the then management decided to sell the Lotus history. And this was part of it. There were 2 bits of good news. One was, apart from the Lotus Cortina, this was the only other lot that sold for twice its expected value. And the second thing is, the man that bought it took it to Texas and is very nearly finished rebuilding it. Which, you know, it's nice. It was, after the Toyota accountants had helped us, it was definitely price competitive. It was definitely performance competitive. You probably think it's horrible, so that's perhaps a good thing it never happened. But that really marks the last whole car I personally put my pencil out and drew.
And which year are we talking?
And I'd love to see her again one day. But I must say I wasn't very pleasant to the purchaser at the time. I was so upset at the idea that Lotus Heritage was worth a tenth of Silverstone and strangers throwing money in a hat. And that goes for Chapman's personal cars, various prototypes and models that I know just how much effort they've gone into them. Not by me, but by lots and lots of other people. So seeing your cars, not just the Elite and XL, they're up there class, but the others as well. It's very, very nice to see somebody cares. And not only do they care, but they appear to keep them in very, very good condition. I wish I kept all my women in as good condition. So, from my point of view, thank you very much for coming.
Ja, Engels man.
You make it all back.